And that love from coast to coast, man. Planting them seeds so you know we growing. Believing in us, damn right we know when. Ain't got time for the stress and pain. No time for hate, no time for games. It's time to take it up. Take it up. We gon' take it up. Hey.
Real talk for real life. Real talk for real life.
Welcome back to Real Talk for Real Life, where we lead with gratitude and we build with purpose. I am your host, Sherri Ann, certified professional coach, and today's conversation is personal. This month, we're talking about boundaries, what they look like, why they matter, and why so many women struggle to set them consistently. And I happen to be one of those women. But before we get into today's conversation, I do want to let you know that Real Talk for Real Life is powered by Women of Dynamic Change, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And our mission, in short, is to break down those barriers that keep women from being able to truly rise and shine. And we're doing that by ensuring that women have access to education, that they have access to resources, networking opportunities, and meaningful connections, and to be supportive in spaces that empower women to become the best version of themselves. So today's conversation is coming from the perspective of a coach and the perspective of a real woman, myself. A woman who's had to learn boundaries, a woman who has struggled with boundaries, a woman who's had to grow through boundaries. Because if we're honest, boundaries sound good in theory until you actually start setting them. And that's when the guilt shows up. That's when discomfort shows up. And that's when people who benefited from you having no boundaries begin reacting differently. So today we're talking about healing. We're talking about peace. We're talking about growth. And we're talking about becoming the women we're created to become and created to be. So let's go ahead and get into it. Boundaries. What are boundaries? So I'll tell you this. I think a lot of people misunderstand boundaries. Boundaries are not about controlling other people. They're about teaching people how to treat you while protecting your emotional, your mental, your physical, and your spiritual well-being. A boundary says this. This is what I need in order to be healthy, in order to be aligned and at peace. And ladies, everybody should not have unlimited access to you. Not your time, not your energy, not your emotions, and not your peace. As women, many of us were taught to overextend ourselves and to keep giving and to keep giving and to keep explaining and to keep tolerating and to keep carrying people emotionally while we're silently draining ourselves. And somewhere along the way, we started confusing self-sacrifice with love, but constantly abandoning yourself to make other people comfortable is definitely not healthy. A boundary is not about rejection. A boundary is self-respect. RESPECT, like Aretha Franklin said. And I think another important part of this, ladies, is understanding why boundaries matter so much in the first place. Because boundaries start with recognizing your value and understanding your worth as a woman. And when you truly begin honoring who you are, and you start placing higher value on yourself. And once you recognize that value, you begin to understand that people who enter your life should honor that too. Now, sometimes that realization does take time. It took time for me. for emotional reasons, spiritual reasons, life experiences, disappointments. There may be some low confidence, and you maybe just want to people please. Whatever the reason may be, and I don't want to get too deep in today because this is definitely a conversation we'll have sometime later in the year. Trust me, we will. But one thing I've learned is this, is that doing the work on yourself is one of the hardest things you'll ever do because healing requires commitment. It requires self-awareness and it requires us to deeply look at ourselves in the mirror. And woo, sometimes we don't like what we see in the mirror. I'm going to let that one sit with y'all for a second. Okay. Sometimes we realize we tolerated too much when we look in the mirror. Sometimes we realize we abandon ourselves, or we ignore the red flags, or we accepted bare minimum, or we over explained, or we were pouring from an empty cup. And unfortunately, the wrong people can recognize when a woman doesn't fully see her value yet. And instead of honoring her, they misuse her kindness, her empathy, her loyalty, or her access. And that's why boundaries matter. This is why they matter. Because boundaries are connected to self-worth. They're connected to confidence, healing, self-care, emotional wellness, and peace. And I also want to say this clearly. I want this to be clear. This conversation is not coming from a therapist. I am not a therapist. It is coming from the perspective of a woman. It is coming from the perspective of a certified professional coach. And the experiences that I have had, I know what it feels like to struggle with boundaries in every area of my life. I know what it feels like to feel guilty after finally saying no. I know what it feels like to over explain yourself because you don't want to disappoint people. And I also know what it feels like eventually to enter a season where you no longer feel guilty for protecting your peace. And it feels so good. Whether that's in a relationship, whether that is in your career, whether it's with family, whether it's with friends, or any area of your life, because if we do not set boundaries for ourselves, eventually we are going to become overwhelmed and stressed, and we will lose ourselves. We stop acknowledging our own value when this happens. And sometimes we forget not only the value we hold as women, but the value we bring into the lives of other people. I'm telling you, I'm going to tell you the real woman perspective. Now, let me talk to the woman who has had difficulty setting boundaries. Sometimes boundaries become necessary after disappointment, after being taken for granted, after feeling emotionally exhausted, after realizing you're pouring into people who are not pouring back into you. And one of the hardest lessons to learn is this: the moment you stop accepting bare minimum, people suddenly think you changed and that you're different. But maybe you didn't become difficult. Maybe you finally became aware of your worth. Maybe you got tired of overgiving. Maybe you got tired of being everything for everybody else and neglecting yourself. And I think a lot of women are currently in that season right now. The healing season, I can't keep abandoning myself anymore. I need peace more than approval season. And let me tell you something. Let me tell you this. Protecting your peace is not selfish, just like self-care is not selfish. It's necessary, especially in leadership, especially in motherhood, especially when you're healing, especially when you're trying to become a better version of yourself. Because growth requires boundaries. It really does. Growth was my word for this year. and I've had to set a lot of boundaries. So let's talk about what boundaries can look like. Sometimes people hear the word boundaries and they think it has to be aggressive. It really doesn't have to be. No. The word no. Boundaries can sound like this, guys. I'm unavailable for that. Get back with me later. That doesn't work for me right now. I need some time for myself. I'm no longer accepting certain behaviors. I love you, but I need space. No, without a long explanation. I'm one of those people that had to learn that. And honestly, some women are exhausted because they keep saying yes while their spirit is screaming no. I was that woman. Boundaries can also look like protecting your mornings, choosing rest without guilt, limiting access, leaving toxic environments, prioritizing your mental health, choosing yourself, and no longer over explaining when you say no, and honoring your energy. And sometimes the strongest boundary is consistent. Consistency. Because people will test boundaries that benefited from you not having any. So let's get into this. I want to ask you this question. Where in your life are you lacking boundaries and it's costing you your peace? I really want you to sit down and think about it. Is it in your relationship? Is it in your work environment? Is it with family? Is it with friendship? Your time? And maybe your energy. And another question I think I want to ask is this: what are you afraid of will happen if you finally set those boundaries? Because healing sometimes requires uncomfortable decisions. It does. And becoming her requires protecting your energy so that you can evolve into that woman that you want to become. Please let that sit with you. If there is one thing I want you all to remember from today's conversation, is this: boundaries are not walls to keep love out. Definitely not that. Healthy boundaries create healthier relationships, and the right people will learn how to meet you with respect, RESPECT, clarity, and intention. You deserve peace, you deserve clarity, and you deserve relationships that don't drain you. And ladies, we already have enough battles in life to face, so let's stop fighting ourselves too. Let's set the boundaries. Let's protect our peace and honor our wants and honor our needs and continue to become the woman you and we were created to be. We're in this together. I want to say thank you for joining me for another episode for Real Talk for Real Life. If this conversation spoke to you, make sure you subscribe, you like, you comment, and share this episode with another woman who may need this reminder today. And always remember to rise and shine.